An account of those who suffered in the 4th century. Summary of the martyrs in the 4th century. This lamentable time commenced with the 10th general persecution instituted by Diocletian and prosecuted by Maximian his associate, which caused a very severe and distressing state of affairs with respect to the violence as well as the long duration of the persecution. In order to proceed systematically, we have presented separately each year with its respective martyrs. In the first year of this persecution, Anthimus and many others at Nicomedia, Philius, Cassianus, Eulalia, and Eucrates, aged virgins, laid down their lives for the evangelical truth. In the second year, Euplius, Pancratius, a youth of 14 years, Justus, Felix, of Thybaris, the 2 brothers, Primus, and Felicianus, suffered martyrdom. In the third year, Appianus, Oppianus, Aedesius, Agathopius, and Theodulus, Julita of Iconia, 40 youths, laid down their lives. In the fourth year, Silvanus, Januarius, Socius, Proculus, Pelagia, Theonas, Cyrenia, and Juliana were martyred. In the 5th year, Theodosia, a virgin of Tyre, Pamphilius, a friend of Eusebius, at Caesarea, were put to death. In the 6th year, Enathas, a virgin of the city of Scythopolis, Catharina, of Alexandria, suffered death. In the 7th year, Ares, Promus, and Elias, at Ascalon, Peter, Absalomus, and 3 sisters, Biblis, Achelina, and Fortunata, poured out their blood. In the 8th year, 2 sisters from Antioch, Irene with her 2 sisters, Peter Nilus, and P. Mithias, 40 were beheaded. Martianilla, Euphratesia, 7 brothers and others were compelled to die. In the 9th year, Lucian, elder at Antioch, Peter, Faustus, Didius, and Ammonius, Anicia, a girl of Thessalonica, and Demetrius suffered death. In the 10th year, Eugenius, Auxentius, Maudatius, and many others were put to death. Then follow 2 other persecutions, one under Licinius, the other under Julian, which are called the 11th and 12th persecutions. Under Licinius suffered Basilius, Ammon, the 2 brothers, Donatian, and Rogatian, of whom the one was baptized, the other not. Under Julian there were slain John and Paul, who opposed war, and some were killed under the emperor Valens. After these details we conclude the account of this century. A.D. 301. At this time, writes P.J. Twisk, the persecution was very severe, for when the emperor, namely Diocletian, would divert himself in the theatre, the whole multitude of the people called him 10 times that the Christians should not be tolerated, and 12 times that they should be exterminated. In the preceding century, in the year 284, we mentioned in connection with the beginning of the reign of Diocletian the first bloody edict issued by the emperor against the pious, steadfast Christians, upon which followed the death of some of them, as may be seen in the cases of Claudius, Asterius, Neon, Zenobius, and the pious Christian women Nuina, Theonilla, Zenobia, sister of the aforementioned Zenobius, etc., most of whom died at Tarsus in Cilicia, the birthplace of the Apostle Paul, for the testimony of Jesus, their Savior. This continued from the aforesaid year until the close of that century, as we have related in the proper place. But in the same place we have also made mention of a second edict by the same emperor, which about 19 years afterwards was followed by the most violent persecution of the Christians. Of this we promised to speak more fully, and now purpose to do so, having come to the very time in which commenced this, the severest and most grievous persecution, which is called the 10th. Of the 10th general persecution of the Christians under Diocletian commenced A.D. 302. Various eminent writers have made mention of this awful and lamentable deed of the Emperor Diocletian, and they cannot sufficiently wonder at 2 things. In the first place, that any one who is at all human being could commit such great cruelty on his fellow men as Diocletian inflicted upon the Christians. In the second place, that the Christians, frail men as they were, could endure all this, and not only this, but that many of them, from love to Jesus Christ, and because of the certain hope of their reward, manifested great joy in their sufferings. We shall speak of the former, and then of the latter, as follows. The cause and severity of this persecution, according to the account of P.J. Twisk, from various ancient and celebrated authors. These 2 emperors, namely Diocletian and Maximian, jointly governed the empire in harmony and constancy, and remained undivided. However, when they had reigned about 10 years, they took counsel together and resolved to exterminate the Christians, because the discord of religion caused great dissensions both in the households and in the Roman Empire. The apostate Christians played the part of instigators and firebrands in the rising of this persecution, holding out to the emperors the hope that the Christians could be exterminated. The persecution which ensued thereupon is considered the most grievous. He writes thus: But the enemies of the truth took the occasion to incite the Emperor Diocletian against the Christians from a certain conflagration in the city. But the enemies of the truth took the occasion to incite the Emperor Diocletian against the Christians from a certain conflagration in the city of Nicomedia, at the time the place where the emperors were wont to reside, by which the palace of the emperor was totally destroyed. With this calamity they charged the Christians. The emperor, enraged beyond measure on this account, easily believed the slanderers, thinking he had sufficient reason for it. He accordingly, in the 19th year of his reign, which coincides with A.D. 302, issued a public decree, as was done in the days of Antiochus, that everyone in every place should sacrifice to the gods of the emperors, and that he who should refuse to do so should be punished with death. Also that the churches or meeting places, and the books of the Christians, should be utterly destroyed. Yea, there was scarcely a large city in the empire in which not daily 100 Christians or thereabouts were slain. It is also recorded that in 1 month 17,000 Christians were put to death in different parts of the empire, so that the blood which was shed colored red many rivers. Some were hanged, others beheaded, some burned, and some sunk by whole shiploads in the depths of the sea. As touching the fearful tortures inflicted, he then writes thus: These tyrants had some of them dragged through the streets, tied to the tails of horses, and after they were mangled and bruised, they had them put back into prison and placed upon beds of potsherds, so that the rest might be more excruciating for them than actual torment. Sometimes they bent down with great force the branches of trees and tied one leg to the branch, and the other to another, and then let the branches spring back into their natural position, so that their limbs were shockingly rent in pieces. They cut off the ears, noses, lips, hands, and toes of many, leaving them only the eyes to inflict still more pain upon them. They sharpened wooden pegs, which they then inserted between the flesh and the nails, and had lead or tin melted and poured as hot as possible over the bare backs. Further statement of the cause and severity of this persecution according to the account in the introduction of the Martyr's Mirror. In A.D. 302 commenced the 10th persecution of the Christians, namely in the 19th year of the reign of Emperor Diocletian. For altogether it had been smouldering previously already. It was in this year that through the edicts it was caused to break forth in flames. It was so great as to exceed, not only in cruelty but also in duration, all the former ones, for under the tyrannous emperors Diocletian, Maximian, Maxentius, and Maximin it lasted 12 years, and this principally in the east. Eusebius, who lived to see this persecution, gives a full description of it. How awful it was we may read in his Church History, Book 8. He writes that the cause of it, who had attained to great distinction. Thus it occurred, says the author of the introduction, that Diocletian first issued decrees commanding that all churches or meeting places of the Christians should be demolished and the Holy Scriptures burned. Then another decree followed, to the effect that the leaders, that is, the teachers and ministers of the churches, should be compelled to sacrifice to the gods or be put to death. Then the tormenting and putting to death was extended also over the common people of the Christians. Footnote. The author writes, in Egypt they were beheaded in such great numbers that the executioners grew tired, and their swords became dull from cutting. The Christians went unto death gladly, without being bound, fearing lest they should not be there in time to die as martyrs. End footnote. Some were torn with sharp irons, others lacerated with hooks, some burned with red-hot plates, some were compelled to sacrifice, and even though they did not sacrifice, it was nevertheless proclaimed that they had sacrificed. Further account of the cause and severity of the above-mentioned persecution according to the account of J. Gizius. He writes, in A.D. 302, in the 19th year of his reign, the Emperor Diocletian instituted a great and unmerciful persecution against the Christians, which is called the 10th persecution. Of this persecution, Sulpicius Severus speaks thus: About 50 years after Valerian, under the reign of Diocletian and Maximian, there arose the most bitter persecution, which for 10 consecutive years ravaged God's people. At this time the whole world was stained with the holy blood of the martyrs, for men hastened emulously to the glorious and famous contest, that is, to martyrdom, for the name of the Lord, and to obtain through a worthy and honorable death the honor which belongs to a martyr, was then sought with more eagerness than at the present time, through a false ambition. Men seek after bishopric. Never was the world so greatly depopulated as through this persecution, and never were greater triumphs gained by us than when by these 10 years of slaughter we could not be conquered. In this persecution Diocletian also employed his associate Maximian Herculeus, a man hard, cruel, faithless, and licentious by nature, who in all things obeyed Diocletian's behests. In this persecution Diocletian raged against those in the east, and Maximian against those in the west. The same author then mentions different causes for this persecution, one of which describes in the following manner. The Emperor Diocletian, determined to restore the Roman Empire to its ancient flourishing condition, and being desirous, therefore, to re-establish all the customs which seemed to be trampled upon, endeavored also to prevent and abolish the difference which he found to exist in the matter of worship, seeking first of all to exterminate the Christian religion as one which cursed and rejected all idolatry. There were very many philosophers and sophists who instigated the emperor to this, and confirmed him in his purpose. By violent and satiric writings they incited the emperor and all princes and judges, ridiculed the Christian religion, and charged it with being an innovation, falsehood, and wicked superstition. On the other hand, they extolled the heathen religion as the most ancient, together with the worship of the gods, who, as they said, ruled the world by their power and majesty. Among these instigators, besides Apollonius, were Porphyry, a philosopher, who from a Jew had become a Christian, and from a Christian an apostate, and Hierocles, a man of great popularity. Against Porphyry wrote Methodius, a bishop of Tyre, Eusebius, and Apollinaris, and against Hierocles wrote this same Eusebius. Lactantius wrote against both, and all others of the same stamp. Touching the torments, he writes, among other things, the following. It would take too long to recount in writing all the different manners in which, through the instigation of the devil, the Christians were put to death at this particular time, were simply preparatories for severer torments that brought on death. Over some molten lead was poured, some were roasted before glowing coals with long-continued torments, as we have shown in another place. Others had the fingers of both hands pierced with sharp awls and needles, which were inserted between the flesh and the nails. Of others we read that after having been beaten on the bare body for a long time with thin rods and leaden plates, they were cast as food before bears, lions, leopards, and other beasts. A little further on he says, some were suffocated with smoke of a slow fire, of moistened combustibles. Others, whose noses, ears, and hands had been cut off, were suffered to roam in misery about the country, as a terror to other unknown Christians. As touching the places where these cruelties were inflicted upon the defenseless and innocent Christians, the aforementioned author writes, this persecution extended over the whole world, Asia, Africa, Europe, and all the islands, especially Sicilia, Lesbos, and Sonus. Then, after having related the destruction of several cities, he says, many other cities had to taste in their whole body the bitter cup of this persecution, especially Thebes and Antino in Egypt, Nicopolis and Thracia, Aquileia in Italy, where all the Christian believers were slain, Florence, Bergamo, Verona, Naples, Beneventum, and Venusia, in Gallia, Marseille, and Treves, where Rictionaris proceeded with such violence and cruelty in this matter that the blood which was shed colored many rivers. In Germany, the city of Augusta, and even Spain, Britannia, and Rhaetia, and other provinces were not exempt. Notice to the reader. Before we proceed to give a special account of the martyrs who were put to death in this persecution, we deem it necessary to call the attention of the reader to the following points. 1. That after AD 300, this is, the beginning of this century, many errors began to arise among some of those who were called Christians, especially among those who believed under the Roman dominion. Yea, they went so far as to resort to carnal weapons, which, however, had already previously been done by some, through which the defenseless and meek lambs of Christ suffered not a little distress, fear, and sorrow. 2. That besides the martyrs of the true faith, some of the aforesaid class suffered themselves to be killed for their opinions, whereby the death and the glorious martyrdom of the true Christian believers were not a little obscured. 3. That in order to distinguish these from the former, we have exerted our utmost diligence, so that, as far as we know, there are not found among the martyrs of whom we have given, or may yet give an account, any who can be shown to have been guilty of gross errors, much less of the shedding of blood. At least we have not been able to detect it in any of them, and hence, in accordance with the spirit of love, we must judge and believe the best of them. As this persecution under Diocletian and Maximian was not only very severe, but also of long duration, we have deemed it well to present its years separately in consecutive order, and to show what the pious martyrs suffered in each year, steadfastly confessing with their blood the truth of God.